Hi, and welcome to our lecture on communication and feedback. My name is Clark Imus, and I'll be facilitating this online lecture. Let's go ahead and jump in. We know that as instructors and as providers, communication and feedback is an essential skill that we must be able to master in order for us to have the positive ability to impact our students and to make sure that the learning of the content that we're presenting gets across in a meaningful way that's retained by the student. We know that good communication ability is an aspect of professionalism, and it's one that we as educators must master. And it's oftentimes easy for us to be able to build upon the skill set we have for communication as an EMS provider. That foundation is already there, so it generally is a relatively easy progression to continue to use those same skills as we begin to communicate and provide feedback to our students. Now, many of the problems within the classroom will be caused by, or at least be partially related to, or an element of miscommunication. The more that we can work to try to clarify, to be clear, concise with our feedback and our instruction to our students, the less likely we are to have to worry about errors or omissions when it comes to communication or feedback from an instructional standpoint. Now, we also have to remember that when we're in the classroom, communication is key. The instructor must have a positive attitude. They must bring with them a positive environment for communication. And we have to recognize that we communicate with people when the subject is both positive or negative. If we're brainstorming or problem solving, it doesn't make a difference. Communication is communication, and it really is the root of learning. It's our ability to help facilitate that communication within the classroom that's going to help the students be able to bridge that gap between where they are, filling in any of those knowledge gaps, and getting to that end goal to be successful as an emergency medical responder. Now, there are some things we have to recognize of how we actually give feedback to students. The first is you need to praise in public and you need to punish in private. If you're going to build somebody up, build them up in public. That's one of the best things that you can do to help with their self-confidence, to help them get where they need to be as a student. If you're going to provide improvements or some type of punishment or feedback that's very constructive in nature, it's best to do that in private where the students are going to be able to feel safe and welcomed that feedback and that communication rather than throwing up barriers or creating excuses and things that oftentimes shut down the communication process. We want to catch people doing the right things and praise them for that. When you see somebody going above and beyond or working hard or helping another student or picking themselves up after they've made a mistake or they failed to go back at that task again, reward them, praise them in public because that's really important for their growth. Now, feedback is important. Feedback is going to be there to help us provide information back on performance as soon as possible after the action. Feedback has to be timely in order for it to be meaningful. We also have to provide feedback about both the positive attributes and the negative attributes regarding their behaviors or performance. And we want to try to start with the positive statements to cover the negative information and then end on a positive note. You may hear this as the good, bad, good sandwich or the positive, negative, positive sandwich. It's just a way of being able to kind of frame areas for improvement with positive attributes to help, again, support and motivate the learner. Now, as an instructor, one of the ways that we think about communication is oftentimes the way in which we verbally provide information to our students, and that's very important. However, there is an attribute of active listening that is a very important skill as well, too. My mom has always told me, she said, Clark, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in proportion. You should listen twice as much as you speak. And I think that's a really important attribute as an instructor, is how well can you truly deploy active listening. Now, when we're employing active listening, there's this aspect of listening to what's being said, but also listen for what others are saying. Listen for what is said and listen for what is not necessarily being said. We know that listening is a difficult skill to develop because we oftentimes are going to be thinking about our response immediately before we actually begin to absorb that content. And so there's some tools and things you can do to eliminate that bias that you may oftentimes have by trying to think about a response. When you're employing active listening, paraphrase what you're going to say or what you said, pardon me, and repeat it back what was said to be able to verify your understanding of the message that you received. I like to ask, does that make sense? like if I explain something to somebody and they're kind of giving me the deer in the headlight looks, I like to ask them, does that make sense? And I may even go back about it by trying to repeat some of those attributes as well. Those are some of the key things that when you think about active listening is being able to take time to let the listening occur, making sure that we're not overthinking our response. And then remember, paraphrase or repeat back, echo back what's been said. That will help you facilitate that thought a little bit easier. Now, we also want to make sure that when you encode a message or you send a message, right, you want to make sure that the message that you're sending is received and is understood. So we want to ask the receiver to rephrase what you said. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, that makes sense to me this way. Maybe they can come up with a way that we can rephrase that content. You may also have to provide more information that may be needed for clarification purposes, right? So sometimes the information you may present may not be enough to adequately check the box or for the learner to be able to understand what you're trying to communicate. Now, there's a number of different aspects when it comes to communication and feedback that are important. Body language is one of them. As an instructor, if I were to sit like this, or I sit like this with my glasses off my head, I'm closed, my body language is like this. Another really common one is where I'm listening to you, but you're actually scrolling through your phone. That could be an area, or even if you're doing something as simple as, hey, I got a checklist here, and I'm going to follow my checklist while you do your skill. Clearly, you can't see me. So body language does make a difference when it comes to providing feedback, whether it's in a testing situation, whether it's in a teaching situation, or whether it's in some form of a remedial, whether it's be punitive or non-punitive, some type of remediation. So when you're doing this, things to keep in mind. Number one, keep your hands and your arms relaxed, okay? You don't want to be uptight. You don't want to be crisscross arms, right? You want to try to be as relaxed, as open as you possibly can. Be comfortable in your own skin. Be comfortable in your own personal space. That's going to be able to help you, again, indicate that you're listening as an active listener. And then you also want to make sure that you give your full attention to the speaker, right? Do what you can to be able to make eye contact, things that you can do to be able to show that you understand, nodding, body language, facial expressions, both neutral or positive facial expressions oftentimes be helpful. You probably don't want to be sitting there doing like, oh God, sour face because of something they said. You're going to try to listen and hear it as best as you can. Now, when you get into questioning techniques to use in the classroom, we've got to recognize there's a number of little nuances that we can introduce. But the way in which you question your students really will determine the meaningfulness that you can have from that learning experience. And one of the things that you can easily do in those is, again, listen. Listen. One of the things that's important is what's called the pause. Pause for dramatic effect. The pause is, in essence, where you ask a question and then wait to get a reply. Oftentimes in EMS, we immediately will ask a question, followed by another question, followed by another question, followed by another question, that rapid-fire questioning when we're doing a patient assessment. We know that that's not going to be very useful for our patients to be able to provide us with the information we want back from that. Same thing happens when it comes to a student. Wait for them to have a reply, okay? You can also use to be able to add emphasis to a situation or to a point you're trying to make, right? You're trying to formulate a response. It's really important that you don't do that. Pause. Dramatic effect. People are going to listen a little bit more. When there's silence in the rooms, people think something's typically wrong. They're going to start to look what's going on. They're going to start to tune in a little bit more. And it's helpful when the students are not focused, right? When they're not focused on what they need to, silence oftentimes redirects their attention. It will bring their attention back onto you when you can say, yep, I'm going to be quiet for a moment, and then we'll go ahead and continue. Allow for students to be able to think about their response, right? You need to give them enough time to compute, and they're not necessarily as fast as what you are. It may take them time to understand what you said, to be able to break down or to clarify what you're requesting. Give them time to think before you begin to answer the question for them, right? A lot of studies have shown that instructors will allow longer think times for students that they believe that they can actually answer the question. So if you wait longer, the students will answer the question, right? So allow for that longer think time, because in the end, They're actually thinking about the question that you've asked them. That's really important. Now, calling on students in class, you got to have a way in which you do this so that you're not calling on the same students all the time. There's always going to be those students in class that are going to raise their hand for every question, or sometimes they don't even raise their hand, they just blurt out an answer. That's going to happen. There are ways in which that you can be able to do this. When you call on students in class, in essence, you're calling on them because you're trying to check what their level of understanding or the level of recall is for the certain type of content that you're presenting. Make sure you don't always call on the first person with that answer as a response. You'll end up only answering for that one student, right? And then don't let the fastest student be the one that dominates the class either. Just because they're smart doesn't mean that the others don't want an opportunity to participate. One of the things that I am a big fan of is what's called Red Solo Cup. You may remember the country song Red Solo Cup, I Lift You Up. I like that one because I have a red Solo Cup and I have a whole box of tongue depressors or popsicle sticks. And I pass them out at the beginning of every class, and I ask the students to write their name of what they would prefer to be called professionally. And then on the back side, I ask for them to write a positive affirmation statement, a statement that would lift them up when they do something successful, or even when they would do something incorrect, something that would still help bring them back up. For example, one student's was when the going gets tough, don't quit going. Another one was when you feel like quitting, remember why you started. Failure is part of success. You can do this. You're smart and handsome. One student had, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But when you decide to randomly call on students, you can pull those popsicle sticks out and use that to be able to call on that student. And then you can also flip it over and give them a positive affirmation, whether they got the question right or wrong. Then you can take that pen or that popsicle stick, whatever it is, and put it into a separate area. And then you won't call on the same student twice. You can actually ensure that you're getting equity when it comes to being able to call on your students. That's a really cool way of being able to do that. There's a lot of other ways that you can use to call on students in class. There's the online wheel where you spin the wheel and kind of like Wheel of Fortune, and it lands on an individual's name. That's kind of cool that way. And there's just a number of other different ways that you can do that to call on students if you're trying to randomize it a little bit. Things to keep in mind: don't single out individual students, right? If you're trying to make a point because someone's not paying attention, that's probably not the student to call on. That's not going to help build them up, and it's probably not going to get you the response that you want from your other learners as well. Make sure you're going around the room, and if you do so, follow a pattern. Students like behaviors that they can predict, and the more predictable you can be when it comes to how you call on students, that may help them, at least reduce some anxiety, but oftentimes they may tune out until they get close enough to being called. That's where I like to use those the Red Solo Cup popsicle sticks. We also want to make sure that if we can, we try to use a prop. I'm a big fan of having, we have a lot of kinesthetic learners in EMS. Have yourself a ball, have yourself football in the class, something that you can be able to toss around when students want to be able to ask questions or do some type of answer, Q&A. Throw something around. Have a your speaker stick, right, or whatever you want to call it. You're also going to want to make sure that you also don't forget to work alphabetically through your roster. This will help you ensure that you don't miss any students. And again, it's going to make it so that you're going to be able to have that consistency and not picking on just one student or another based on their name or based on the fact that you know their name, right? Use your roster to help you navigate that. And then last but not least, don't be afraid to put names in a hat or numbers in a hat. One of the things I love to do is scenarios from a hat. I love to have all the students take and create some scenarios on the topics we've been talking about, whatever the illness might be, and they throw it into the hat, and we use a little fire helmet, a little plastic one, and they reach in and we pull it out, and that's the scenario we do for that class. And then it gives us, again, that ability to kind of keep things light and keep things moving without a whole lot of concern about who I'm calling out in class. Now, we also want to watch for students to determine how comfortable they are with the techniques that we're using, because we don't want to intimidate any students, specifically our shy students, right? Those students oftentimes may be less anxious if you can establish a little bit of what they're going to be doing up front. And by using some of the techniques we talked about in the previous slide, that's going to help you be able to facilitate that aspect. Another really important part is to make sure that you're asking open-ended questions. Open-ended questions is a way in which you can have a very robust, open dialogue and discussion. And a lot of times it's ways in which you can get your students to be able to identify what they know. Where are they at when it comes to problem solving, evaluating, or critical thinking, and the higher ordered aspect of learning? Where are they at in that? If I ask closed-ended questions, I'm going to get closed-ended responses. I want to ask open-ended questions so I can get open-ended responses, and then use that to be able to facilitate the dialogue that I need to have with my students. So move the students into small groups if you're going to do a discussion initially. It's going to help them to be able to do that, right? And then from there, they can report back what points they determined to the larger group. You got to make sure that when you're doing your job as a facilitator, that you are really rotating around to be able to help answer questions and keep things on task. Again, you got to remember when we're facilitating aspects, we're working in communication, we're really focusing on the student-centered learning experience. This is one where we're doing group work or discussions, things where we're moving around the room to help answer a lot of individualized questions, not necessarily just present an overview or a blanket education on the topic at hand. Now, when it comes to facilitating and coaching, again, it's going to be accomplished through individual or through small group work, and it's typically a very intensive method for evaluating students. It's a great way if you can use this to help the students coach each other, and then also to be able to use that as a tool to help teach them how to facilitate and how to be a coach themselves. It's a part of the job of EMS. And then more importantly, as you as an educator, we want to be doing as much as we can by being able to see what our students are doing individually and also within the group work. That's going to help us be able to understand how we can coach and how we can facilitate their growth. Now, when it comes to counseling students, we've got to recognize that there's a number of different ways that we can do this. Counseling students, in essence, is the process that involves said members of the educational team, while we can do things where we're able to make sure that the student has some confidentiality. And depending on what we're counseling the student on, depending on what we're giving feedback on, is going to depend on who necessarily needs to be there. For example, a medical director for your program may need to be there if you're looking to dismiss someone for falsifying documentation or cheating or something along those lines. Supervisor or the employer may need to be present if it's a course that is sponsored and that they're hired and employed to be able to be working while they're going to school. Sometimes in higher education or an education that's not part of industry, you're going to find that FERPA, your Family Rights and Privacy Act, is not going to be something that we can easily break. And so supervisors and employers are not something that are always going to be able to participate in this. But sometimes it may be appropriate. If there was an issue at a clinical site and the supervisor that was there on that call can participate to help counsel and coach that student, then that may be appropriate. We also want to think about a mentor or an experienced instructor that can help us through the coaching process as new instructors. And then do we need to have anyone external there to represent or help provide representation for the student themselves? Now, you want to obviously approach your counseling tactfully. One of the things that I think is important is that I don't like to say I'm calling you in for a write-up, because a write-up is considered to be negative. It's got negative connotations with it. That's just how it goes. But if you say counseling or coaching and counseling is how I typically refer to it, it has more of a supportive nature sound to it, at least. And we want to facilitate that process as well to make sure that it's something that's going to lead to growth of the learner, not something that's going to lead to them shutting down or withdrawing from the program or not being successful. So when we do this, your generic approach would start off with a positive, friendly greeting, where you're going to try to create an environment that feels safe for the student, one that it's going to be free of judgment, and really is going to be focused on the facts. From there, you're going to state the facts. What's the behavior? What's the performance issue? As they are known to you, as it's been documented to you. You're not necessarily trying to make a case for their behavior. You're trying to document or prove or demonstrate the lack thereof said performance, and so that they're aware of where their deficiencies may lie. We want to allow the student then to have an opportunity to explain the situation from their perspective. There's always two sides to every story, and every student deserves due process and a fair evaluation. And to make sure that that happens, we're going to really have to make sure that we hear what they have to say. Does it always make a difference in the outcome? No, but it does help us to be able to have some understanding and be able to let our students know that we are there to listen to what he or she was thinking or the reasons for their actions. Now, you want to confirm that they understood the problem. Check and see if they have all the facts. Ask for clarification if you feel like it's needed. From there, you want to explain the rules, the regulations, the laws, the policies that are going to be governing their behavior while they're in your program and what consequences and the steps thereof might come into play. Now, you want to be able to work together collectively to get out of this rut so we're not in this situation where we're just having continuous coaching sessions or counseling sessions and we're not getting the progress we want to see out of them. A lot of these result in a learning or behavioral contract. And I'm going to show you here in just a second our coaching and counseling form that we use here at KCC, and I encourage you to borrow it if you need to for your own programming. But it is helpful because we also want to make sure that we do everything we can to discuss, detect, and identify what's going on, and making sure that we can together document and create a plan, an action plan, to prevent those behaviors from happening again. And so we want to review what's been covered, what was discussed, what was decided. Sometimes students may not agree with what's been decided, but we need to review it and do the best that you can to try to end on a positive note. Not every student is going to be open to that positive end note because of the results or the feedback you've provided them, but it is important that you try to tie it up with a pretty bow, that you are appreciative of their time and their efforts and that you have faith in their abilities to continue to show and demonstrate growth. That really is important. These are things that need to be done in writing. You want to provide copies to the students and to all their stakeholders, making sure that copies can not only get to the student but also get into the student's file. You want to make sure that you inform the student of the individuals who will receive this information. For us, it's literally right on the form that we use to make sure it's as transparent as can be. Put a copy of the document in the appropriate student or course file because, again, we know that it needs to happen. The state of Michigan is going to want to see our great students and our students that gave us a number of challenges. Same thing with our national accreditation. And always, 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 always document. Just like we tell our students, if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. Same thing happens when it comes to behavioral issues. Document everything you can. Even if it's in an email, print it out or save it and put it in a file. The more you do that, the better off it's going to serve you in the long run. Again, especially if it continues to get progressively worse. Use your professional ethics in academic communications, right? Be honest with what you're doing. Protect their confidentiality and address people directly. Don't direct one of the things that I can't stand is when an instructor has a problem student and instead of addressing the problem, they automatically just take it to the whole class, and all of a sudden the whole class is paying for one student's mistakes. That's not okay. If you've got an issue, address the issue head on. Do it in a way that's meaningful, and that's going to make a big difference, right? And remember, treat people how you want to be treated. Your ability to be an effective communicator and facilitator are going to be critical to your success as an educator. I'm going to go ahead and show you our coaching and counseling form. You can find that on our EMS student resources page at www.kellogg.edu/EMS. Okay, and so now we're looking again here at our website. This is kellogg.edu/EMS. Over here under my EMS quick links, you're going to see that I have a spot that says EMS student resources. I'm going to click on that. And then over here, you're going to see we have our handbook. We have our handbook acknowledgement, and then here our coaching and counseling form, and that's the form that we're going to be taking a look at. Now, the first page of this form is actually meant to be the response back from a student. And so as we take a look at this here, you'll see that the first page may not make a whole lot of sense because it is on the response side. So I'm going to actually skip the first page, and I'm going to go right down here to the second page. And this is going to be the student coaching and counseling form where the instructor issuing the coaching and counseling notification must submit the proper KCC retention alert prior to taking action. So we document things on paper, but we also document them electronically through our own internal system. From here, we've got three processes. We have a verbal, a written, and a critical. And our handbook identifies certain things that would classify immediately as a written or immediately as a critical. A critical, for example, could be up for dismissal from the program. A verbal may mean that, hey, you came late to class a couple times. We need you to get it on top of where you need to be. And, hey, maybe it progresses to a written if they continue to have problems with attendance, up until eventually it progresses to a critical. So this does help you with that paper trail. Dates and student names are important here. We oftentimes will put in what the warning was issued for. In this case, if it was a verbal, written, or critical. And then what's the seriousness of the problem? So again, the what is here. The so what is going to be here. This is going to be the seriousness of the problem. Most of the time I'll go back to our EMS student handbook and pull the paragraph that talks about the policy or copy a section from the syllabus, whatever captures the seriousness of it. And then what's the action? What's going to be taken from both the warning it was issued and the seriousness of the problem. And then there's a much larger section for you to put additional notes. And then here's where the student will sign. The instructor will sign, the educational coordinator will sign, and then from there we're going to date it. And then we want to know, was the director of that department notified? So again, I serve as a coordinator, so we have our adjuncts, we have our lead faculty, we have our coordinator, and then we have our director. And so some of these, we don't need to notify the director, right? Maybe it's just a verbal warning. They probably don't need to be involved yet. But maybe we're going to try to get them removed from the program for, I don't know, coming intoxicated to class. Then that's something we definitely need to make sure that we are, again, following that proper process and notifying those individuals. If I go back to the first page, and we moved it this way because the students were just not filling out the page in time. They were going and filling it, just leaving it blank. But the student puts their name, the date, and they have to outline what their perception of the problem is. Now that we've identified to them what the concern is, what is their perception? What is their awareness of the situation of the problem? And then what steps will they take to correct the problem? And then from there, you can see that all of these different things are going to be able to be filled out and then signed again and then put back into the student's folder. Again, it needs to go to the student, and a copy needs to go to the student folder. It's very important that that's where those go at the end. Now, how this looks for you, it really is just going to depend on what you think works best for your department or for your program. But I think this is a very helpful tool when it comes to being able to navigate those coaching and counseling. I'm going to take us here real quick to the COAMPS website as well to be able to show you some of the tools that they use for coaching and counseling. One of the areas that I think that's important for you to be familiar with is the resources that are available through the Committee on Accreditation for the EMS profession. Whether you're teaching paramedics or EMTs or first responders, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. But the resources that are available here are really helpful. So at the top banner here, you're going to see a tab that says Resource Library. You can easily click on that. And then you're going to find a ton of different resources that are all going to be here as you go down through. There's some KHEP standards. There's actually some new standards that are out along with their interpretations. It's kind of neat to read. There's some clinical coordinator best documents and different things you may see there. Here again, you can see just some different components. Okay, so here is the student counseling form that comes from COAMPS. This was last created in November of 2020. It's pretty similar. Again, program number, student name, date, all that information that's in here. Signatures for everybody to be able to sign. I mean, again, it's the same type of concept. You could use something very similar to this as well, too. That will be one that will definitely be helpful as well, too. If you're going to have to do a student dismissal, there's an example of a student dismissal form here. So this is, again, where we would be able to see what was going on. If they were dismissed, what was the reason why that they were dismissed. And then a reason for dismissal. It was a non-academic withdrawal. There's a reason for that. And then a spot for the program director to be able to sign. Again, we're just talking about ways that you can document these aspects to provide some of that communication. And then the last one I was going to show you, student progress note tracking. And here's another example of those two. And again, I would encourage you to check these sites out. It's definitely going to be helpful for you to get an idea of what some of these look like. Okay, so here you can easily see again areas of strength, skill progress, student strengths, areas for improvement. Just another really nice way of being able to document students' academic progress in a nice typable form, easily editable. So hopefully that was a helpful lesson for you. I'm happy to be able to discuss these things in further detail for you. Feel free to reach out, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.